Pretty Girl Club. So today I'm going to be talking about the exotical experience, your exotical wake-up call. What is an ambiguous Black experience, and why does this channel have women of different complexions? Why does this channel include both mixed Black women as well as monoracial Black women? I'm going to tell you the things that all of us exoticals have in common. So, the number one thing that we have in common is our Blackness. Our Blackness is what unites us on this channel. So, this channel is filled with women who, whether they're monoracial or multiracial, we actually cherish our Blackness. I've never seen a multiracial person create a channel where they are cherishing their Blackness and not pedestalizing their non-Blackness. And so that's the number one thing that all exoticals have in common. We all are Black, part Black, whether you're monoracial Black, light skinned Black, whatever you want to call it, or some sort of multiracial or biracial Black person. Our Blackness is the number one thing that we all have in common. But what makes us stand out from unambiguous Blackness is that we have what I call ambiguous Blackness, or the ambiguous Black experience. So I'm just making that term up. And the reason that I'm making that up is because I feel like for decades we have not had a language to describe our experience. And when I use that term ambiguous, I'm actually basing that off of the term that Black women coined, and they call it being unambiguously Black. So what they're saying over there is that no matter where they go, no matter what scenario they're in, no matter what color their hair is, no matter the hairstyle and all that, they are viewed as unambiguously Black. When it comes to dealing with stereotypes and stuff, all of the stereotypes that they receive, positive or negative, are based on Blackness. And here on this channel, what all the exoticals have in common is that we have had that experience of the Blackness part, where maybe we have dealt with racism, colorism, texturism, or featureism, but we also have ambiguity in the sense that we receive stereotypes about other parts of ourselves, such as our hair textures, our skin colors, like maybe if your skin is a little bit lighter, or maybe if your hair is a little bit looser, maybe you have lighter eyes or whatever. So that is something else that we all have in common. We all have at least one feature that others us from the unambiguous community. So when I talk about a feature that can other you, it could be something that's a part of your phenotype, such as having a light skin tone. Maybe you have light eyes. Maybe you have freckles or keen features, or a loose hair texture. Maybe you have a lighter hair color. Or maybe it's your actual racial background. Maybe you are a mixed Black person, whether you're a multi-generationally mixed Creole person or some sort of Afro-Latina, or maybe you've got some Black and white in your background. And so that is actually what separates our experiences from unambiguous Black women. So this channel, it was actually not supposed to be based on just your looks or just your race. This channel is supposed to include both. That's why I called it Exoticals United. Another thing that we all have in common over here is that we could not relate to the talking points that we saw in unambiguous spaces. And by the way, I've noticed that some people, they view that as like, oh, you must think you're better. And that's a sign that you're probably not an exotical. That's a sign that you are unambiguous, because, or maybe your experience aligns more with unambiguous people, because we specifically wanted to create our own spaces so that we can stop infiltrating other spaces that were not created for us. Because if dark-skinned, unambiguous Black women are talking about colorism, texturism, featureism, or dealing with misogynoir, or all of these things that they have to deal with on a daily basis, for exoticals, we kind of dip in and out of those experiences. So we may experience misogynoir, but it's only 50% of the time, or 10% of the time, or for some of us, it's never. But that's another thing that we all have in common here as exoticals. We don't have an unambiguous experience. Our life experiences are not unambiguous. Our life experiences actually contradict one another. So in one setting, we may be receiving colorism, but then in another setting, we may be pedestalized. In one setting, we may be viewed as just Black, but then in another setting, we are viewed as this new term, light-skinned Black. You know what I mean? So we have what I call an ambiguous experience. We have a mixture of different experiences based on our phenotype or based on our genotype, which means if you're like mixed race or something like that, or if your admixture happens to show up in your phenotype. And so that's what I call the ambiguous experience. Another thing that all exoticals have in common is that we have all experienced being pedestalized, being fetishized, being othered, or being exotified. That is something that across the board, we have had all of those experiences at some point. And so it doesn't matter whether we've been pedestalized by the Black community or even by the white community. Like for some people, maybe you've been told by the white community, you're not like other Blacks, or, you've been told comments like that, or you've been told that you are safe or that you are like a watered down type of Black person. So that's another thing that all of us exoticals have in common. We have all had that experience of being othered. And so a lot of people, they think that my channel, they're like, well, why are you grouping all of these women together? Or why are you trying to steal the light-skinned Black people? Or why are you trying to steal the dark-skinned women that benefit from featureism or texturism? Well, it's because all of us have not had a safe space. And so another thing that we all have in common, all exoticals across the board, have experienced being silenced or feeling guilty, like being guilted by unambiguous Black people because we have not experienced the same traumas, or we haven't experienced the traumas on the same level. And that's why I say our experiences here are more ambiguous. In fact, a lot of our core traumas that we have experienced as exoticals, they are not the same core traumas that you will see talked about in unambiguous Black spaces. A lot of unambiguous Black women on their YouTube channels, when they talk about their main traumas, they talk about being victims of colorism, texturism, or featureism and stuff like that. And by the way, all of those things are valid. Those women deserve a safe space. We should not be going over there trying to redirect their talking points and center ourselves in their conversations. And so the core traumas over here, though, are very different, because another thing that exoticals share across the board, regardless of skin tone or race or hair texture, is that our core traumas are directly tied to our privileges. Our core traumas are directly tied to the fact that we have sometimes been pedestalized or sometimes been exotified. Our core traumas are directly tied to the fact that in some cases we have avoided colorism, texturism, or featureism, or some sort of racism, because we have something slightly different about us. So yes, it could be something as simple as having type 3 hair, something as simple as having green eyes, something as simple as having a lighter skin tone changes the course of your life and literally changes your personal reality. And anybody who's unambiguous obviously wouldn't understand that because your experience is unambiguous. But if you are a person who has something that's slightly different, yes, you do have a different life experience. And so that's another thing that we all have in common as exoticals. Regardless of what makes us an exotical, our traumas over here have been directly tied to the fact that we do not look exactly like this. And I know that if you're a non-Black person watching this, you may not understand, and that's okay. But we all know that whether you're in the Black community or even if you're in a white community, sometimes people will nitpick and they will pinpoint your different features or your different mixtures or your different hair textures and stuff, and it causes you to have a different experience. And so another thing that all exoticals have in common is we've all experienced both being pedestalized but also being demonized because of that pedestal. So another one of the main traumas that we have experienced is guilt. So whether it's light skin guilt, whether it's some sort of texturism guilt, whether it's some sort of featureism guilt, one thing that we all have in common is that we have all felt the pressure to be extremely pro-Black and to be hyper pro-Black and to also be silent about our experiences because obviously they are viewed as not being as serious as unambiguous women. And I agree that I do think that, if you're unambiguous and you feel like your life has been harder or, you don't want to hear about being privileged because you haven't had that experience, that is valid. And so that's why we decided to create our own online spaces, because we are not trying to brag. We don't want to go to colorism channels and be like, well, I've never experienced that, or go to texturism channels and be like, oh, well, my hair is a type 3, so that's an inappropriate setting to talk about those things. And so that's why we had to create our own spaces, because another one of the core traumas that exoticals have experienced is being silenced. Exoticals have not had the same privilege. I call it victim privilege, and I'm not trying to say that if you're unambiguous, you're automatically a victim, but I really do think that there is a privilege that comes with unambiguous blackness and having an opportunity to speak out about how bad it is for you. And you know what? That's totally fine, because I really do think that if you truly had it worse or whatever, you should be the main one talking about that, and you should have the freedom to vent as much as you want. But one thing that all exoticals have in common is also having to stay silent on certain topics because we simply haven't had those experiences. A lot of people in the unambiguous community have made the complaint, and they'll be like, oh, well, these types of women, they're complacent about colorism, they're complacent about texturism, they're complacent about featureism. Well, the reason that exoticals come off as being complacent is because we have not experienced the same discrimination as unambiguous women, because even though we may have broad features or 4C hair or dark skin, we happen to not have all three of those things at the same time. And so because of that, we actually cannot speak on traumas that we don't have. And so that's another thing that all of us exoticals have in common. It's that all of us cannot relate, actually. We can't relate on the same level as unambiguous Black women when it comes to colorism, texturism, and featureism. And so for the people who are asking, like, well, what do you guys all have in common? Light-skinned Black women, mixed Black women, biracial Black women, dark-skinned women who have keen features, or maybe they have type 3 hair or light eyes. That's too many different phenotypes. What do you all have in common? Well, I just told you, we've all been othered, we've all been pedestalized, we've all been demonized because of our pedestals, and we've all been silenced, we've all been exotified. So that's actually like 5 things right there, just right off the top of my head, that all of us undeniably have in common. So that's what I call the ambiguous Black experience. So you have a Black experience, so you have dealt with some of the Black struggles, but you have not dealt with unambiguously Black struggles. And when I say unambiguously Black struggles, what I'm talking about is whatever they're talking about in the unambiguous spaces as being their struggles. So for example, not having representation in Hollywood. We cannot relate to that because all exoticals have had some sort of representation in Hollywood or in Black Hollywood or in our countries of origin if we are multiracial and we have backgrounds from the Hispanic community or whatever. So we don't have some of the same experiences. Another thing that all exoticals have in common is being propped up as an unambiguously Black beauty standard. That's another thing that all exoticals have in common across the board, regardless of skin tone, hair texture, or whatever. You can find plenty of women in Hollywood who look like us. And I'm not trying to say it like, oh my God, we're just a bunch of Hollywood superstars, but I am saying that the beauty standards in the Black community are sometimes overlapping with women who benefit from either colorism, texturism, or featureism. So some of us may be accused of benefiting from more than one of those things, but that's another thing though, that we all have in common. We have all benefited from or been accused of benefiting from at least one ism. And so some people, they think that by admitting that I'm like trying to perpetuate it. And it's like, no, acknowledging my privilege does not mean that, oh, this is a good thing, privilege is good, white privilege is good. No, it's not that we're trying to say we're better, but we just created a safe space for ourselves to acknowledge our privilege, because it's actually not good to go into unambiguous women's spaces and then say, oh yeah, well, I had this kind of privilege in the Black community. No, that's an inappropriate thing to do, right? And so we need our own spaces so that we can acknowledge our privileges as well, and then we can talk about whatever we want to talk about. Also, when I use the term looking mixed, I understand that you can be mixed and really look like anything, but unfortunately society is kind of ignorant. A lot of people are very ignorant, so they have a certain stereotype of what mixed people look like. And so what I call that is you have a mix of both Black and also non-Black features. And I know that that's a stereotype, but as exoticals, we deal with a lot of stereotypes. we can get mistaken for multiple ethnicities. We can get mistaken for being from other countries or other places that are associated with certain phenotypes. And so for exoticals, because people exotify us, that's literally what I mean when I say people are exotifying you. What I mean is they're saying that you don't look like this picture here of this unambiguous black woman. You look slightly different. So yes, it could be something as simple as an eye color. It could be something as simple as a skin tone or a hair texture. But because of that, it causes us to have a multifaceted experience as opposed to an unambiguous experience, which means there is no ambiguity at all. Nobody's arguing about your skin tone, your hair texture, your eye color, your race, your ethnicity. Nobody's arguing because you're unambiguous. But if you have the exotical experience, it's the exact opposite. So sometimes people may accept you, but then other times people are opening the door for a conversation about your ethnic background or about, who's your mom, who's your dad. That's not your mom, that's not your dad, you must be adopted, that sort of thing. That is something that we all have in common on this channel, regardless of our skin tone or admixture. Another thing that all exoticals have in common is that we don't have as much trauma from isms. And I know that's very messed up. Yes, I get it. Society is bad. It's very bad that people stereotype you or treat you better or worse based on how you look or based on your racial mixtures. But with exoticals, because we have experienced both the bad part and also privilege in other areas, we don't have as many traumas or, in some cases, inferiority complexes as what you would see in some of the unambiguous communities. And by the way, I understand that not every unambiguous girl has an inferiority complex. In fact, those unambiguous girls follow this channel because they can actually relate to this channel more than the other ones. But that is something that all exoticals have in common, though. We don't have the same level of traumas with our color, our hair textures, and our facial features as unambiguous women, because I really do feel like if you're unambiguous, then you are probably dealing with all three, or you're dealing with, the dynamics with black men. That's another thing that all exoticals have in common as well, I've noticed. We have different dynamics with men than the unambiguous black women have had with men in general. I've noticed that there are talking points about men we personally can't relate to, and I'm not trying to say it like, oh my god, nobody wanted you guys and then we were the preferences. I'm not saying it that way, but unfortunately as exoticals we have been stereotyped as being preferences. And in some cases, exoticals, the difference with our experience is, once again, we have an ambiguous experience with men where it's kind of like, yeah, in some cases we may be pedestalized, and then in other cases a man may even be jealous of us, or a man may try to use humbling tactics on us. And I know that other women can experience that as well, but I have noticed that's another thing that we all have in common. And so that's why you hear us talking about different things than what you would see on other channels. Another thing that all exoticals have in common is that we have either questioned ourselves and maybe questioned our own unambiguous blackness, or others have questioned us and they've questioned our blackness in a sense. So, for example, let's say you're a dark-skinned woman and you have green eyes. People are going to question you because they are exotifying you. If you look unambiguous, that means that there's no question. The definition of the word unambiguous literally means there is no ambiguity, there is no questioning, there is no discussion about whether or not you're a part of this ethnicity or that ethnicity, or you're mixed over here, or you're part Asian, or why does your hair have that texture, why are your eyes so light. There is no questioning because you're unambiguous. But for exoticals, one thing that we all have in common is that either other people have questioned us, whether it's our family members, friends, people in the workplace or at school, or we have questioned ourselves because we will watch YouTube channels where they're talking about, their experiences with all these isms, and then we're over here questioning ourselves like, wait, is something wrong with me because I haven't had this experience? Or like, what is she talking about? People are being pedestalized, and then she's showing a picture of a celebrity and that celebrity looks like me. So one thing that us exoticals all have in common, regardless of our phenotypes or race, is that we've all had that experience of either questioning ourselves or others questioning us. And there have also been cases of us not knowing how to navigate, or maybe like other people are confused with where to place us, because we all break stereotypes in some way. whether you're breaking stereotypes because you're a mixed race person or you break stereotypes because you're a monoracial person who doesn't look like the rest of your siblings. You don't look like the rest of your family. And so that's something else we all have in common. We all break stereotypes about blackness or about unambiguous blackness to the point where people are questioning us. If people are questioning you, it's because there is ambiguity there. Otherwise, nobody would have a conversation. It wouldn't be a discussion. Oh, is she light skinned? Oh, no, she is. Oh, but she kind of is. Oh, but she's not that light skinned. Oh, but this other person is also lighter. Oh, what's her hair texture? Oh, you know what? Why does her hair fall down her back and then my hair grows in a different direction? So if you are unambiguous, there would not be a discussion or an argument about any aspect of yourself because you naturally blend in or you fit in. And I've noticed when I look at content from unambiguous women, they actually talk about this. They talk about blending in so much so with their communities and stuff to the point where they have felt invisible. And I'm not trying to bash that, and that is a valid claim to have if you feel like you don't stand out. But for us, we've had the exact opposite experience where either we have a certain feature that has caused us to stand out, we have a certain racial background that has caused us to stand out to the point where people will actually define us based on that feature. They will say, oh, the dark-skinned girl with the light eyes. Oh, yeah, the dark-skinned girl with the straight hair. Oh, the light-skinned girl. So if you're unambiguous, you have not had those experiences because, there is no particular thing where people are describing you based on your differences unless you are in a non-Black community. But for us, we have experienced that where like different people identify us differently. And so, for example, with me, I feel the most Black when I'm at home. I feel the most Black when I am around non-Black people. But then if I go into a room full of Black people, I feel the least Black. So that's the multifaceted experience that exoticals have. We have this experience where it's like, okay, sometimes depending on the room we are in, we are viewed as quote unquote unambiguous, but then other times, maybe if you're around Black men or something, they will notice, oh wait, you're the dark-skinned girl with the blue eyes. Or they'll point it out or something like that. Or sometimes if we are in unambiguous spaces, another thing that happens to exoticals is people will say things like, you don't understand, or you can't relate. Or another thing that we all have in common is that we all are very quick to be accused of benefiting from privileges. People are very quick to accuse us of being colorist, texturist, and featurist because we have all benefited, whether we wanted to or not. We have all benefited from some sort of ism, or we've been accused of benefiting from isms, or we have avoided experiencing the negative side of those isms. And so we don't want to come into unambiguous women's spaces kind of like infiltrating and making it like, well, I can't relate. I've never experienced that. And this is a safe space where we can acknowledge our privileges and where we can also work through any traumas we've experienced. Something else that all exoticals have in common is being in the spotlight or kind of being under a microscope. So because you have one or more features that happens to make you stand out from unambiguous Blackness, people put the spotlight on it. They call it out of nowhere. They're bringing up your skin tone out of nowhere. They're bringing up your eye color out of nowhere. They're bringing up your features out of nowhere. And this is not something that only happens to us in the Black community. So this is another thing that I've noticed unambiguous women don't understand sometimes. They'll be like, oh, well, you're only perceived that way in the Black community. And it's like, no, what all of us exoticals have in common is that we are also perceived or sometimes exotified even in the white community or in other communities. Like, if you're a dark-skinned Black woman and you have green eyes, for example, do you think that Black men are going to be the only ones that notice your eye color? No. Other people from other backgrounds will notice your features that stand out as well. So that is something else that all of us have in common. It's being under the microscope, being under the spotlight, having people calling out the difference that we have in our phenotypes or the difference that we have in our racial background, like if you're a mixed person. But what do you ladies think? Do you feel like all of us exoticals have these things in common? Is there anything else you can think of? Let me know in the comments section and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.